Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Sandra Cantu. Sandra Cantu was born on March 8, 2001 in Tracy, San Joaquin County. She grew up in Orchard Estates Mobile Home Park in Tracy, California, living with her mother, grandparents, and 3 older siblings. Although her parents, Maria and Daniel, were separated, the children remained close to their father through regular phone calls. Sandra was a friendly and outgoing child who made friends easily and was well liked by both kids and adults in the neighborhood. She loved playing outside with her friends. On March 27, 2009, Sandra returned home from school around 2 p.m. and was excited to share her day with her family. Later that afternoon, she went out to play with her friends in the neighborhood, as she usually did. Before leaving the house, Sandra changed into her favorite Hello Kitty top and black leggings and hugged her mother. When dinner time approached at 7 p.m., Sandra had not returned home, which made her mother, Maria, anxious. Maria tried calling some of Sandra's friends to see if she was with them, but no one had seen her. As her worries grew, Maria drove around the neighborhood, asking people if they had seen Sandra, but no one had seen her for hours. At 7:53 p.m., Maria made an urgent call to 911 for help. When Maria reported her daughter Sandra missing, the Tracy Police Department responded promptly to the mobile home park. They initiated a thorough search of the neighborhood, questioning Maria about Sandra's clothing at the time of her disappearance. Maria recalled that Sandra was last seen wearing a pink Hello Kitty shirt, black leggings, and Hannah Montana flip-flops. The police then conducted a door-to-door inquiry, speaking with neighbors to determine if anyone had seen Sandra or observed anything unusual in the area. They also displayed Sandra's picture to all residents. The officers demonstrated a high level of commitment to finding Sandra and identifying potential leads, evident in their meticulous questioning of neighbors and dissemination of Sandra's images in the hope of ensuring her safe return. On March 27th, the police were unable to find any trace of Sandra. The following day, March 28th, they sought help from the FBI, launching a massive search operation. This effort involved cadaver dogs, helicopters, and a large team of volunteers dedicated to finding the missing 8-year-old girl. Detectives also showed Sandra's photos to everyone in the area, hoping for any information about her whereabouts. Unfortunately, no one had any leads. The search for Sandra was a traumatic experience for the Tracy community. Dozens of local volunteers joined 230 professional search and rescue personnel from 16 different agencies to thoroughly search the town for any signs of her. The U.S. Coast Guard further assisted the aerial search over Tracy by deploying a C-13 military plane equipped with state-of-the-art cameras. Sandra's disappearance quickly gained widespread media attention. Authorities initially offered a $2,000 reward for information that could help locate her or uncover clues about her disappearance. As her case received significant media coverage, the reward amount was increased to $30,000. The search for Sandra, an 8-year-old Tracy girl, continues this morning. According to investigators, Sandra Cantu went missing after walking away from her home at the Orchard Estates Mobile Home Park in Tracy. One of the estimated 300 volunteers who joined the search over the weekend expressed their hope that Sandra would be found and returned to her family and friends. Sandra is a Hispanic girl, 4 feet tall, and weighs 45 pounds, with brown hair and brown eyes. Surveillance footage shows Sandra leaving the mobile home park around 4 p.m. and returning, but she was last seen walking away again. The key question is, where did she go that last time, and where is she now? The investigation is ongoing, and police urge anyone with information to contact Tracy authorities. Everyone searched for her, but no signs of her were found. Later, detectives examined the security camera footage installed by Sandra's grandfather. The recording showed Sandra leaving her house, heading to the park to play. When she returned, she seemed happy, skipping back home at 4 p.m. But instead of going inside, she suddenly turned and walked down the street towards one of the exits. The footage stopped at this point, leaving her next steps a mystery. This unexpected behavior was concerning, as Sandra usually followed safety rules about not leaving with strangers. The police suspected that someone or something familiar to her might have caught her attention. The investigators' initial suspect was Sandra's father, Daniel, due to his prolonged absence from her life, which was revealed during the police investigation. Additionally, they discovered that Daniel and Maria were engaged in a financial dispute related to custody issues. However, Maria assured the detective that despite their marital problems, Daniel would never be involved in Sandra's disappearance. According to Maria, Sandra had a strong bond with her father, and they got along well. The media later interviewed Daniel about his missing child. When asked for a statement, Daniel recounted receiving a call from his sister on Friday, informing him that Sandra was missing. He rushed to the scene and waited for a day before returning to work. Daniel stressed that the purpose of the interview was to shift the attention away from himself and onto the potential perpetrator, if there was one. He urged the detective to do their job to the best of their ability, emphasizing the need to focus on finding the real person behind Sandra's disappearance. A week after Sandra Cantu's disappearance, the 8-year-old girl's whereabouts remained unknown. In Tracy, authorities were pursuing hundreds of leads and increasing the reward for information about her. Investigators were combing through trash at the local landfill, searching nearby rivers, and looking into suspicious individuals, including residents of the mobile park and those seen in the area on March 27th. These individuals included an unknown ice cream vendor who had interacted with children in the neighborhood that day, and Frank Waller, a neighbor of the Cantu family who was rumored to be a pedophile. Frank had previously admitted to kissing Sandra on the lips 2 years earlier, claiming it was a friendly gesture. Despite the disturbing nature of his admission, the authorities ultimately cleared him as a suspect, though they made it clear they would keep a close eye on him. Meanwhile, the search for the real perpetrator continued, and the community rallied around Maria, showing her support and love during this tough period. At 8:30 p.m., neighbor Melissa discovered a disturbing handwritten note near a mailbox just miles from Sandra's family. It read, "Cantu locked in stolen suitcase thrown in water on Boucher Road and Whitehall Road." The note had obvious spelling mistakes, sparking questions. Was it real or meant to confuse the investigation? Melissa told FBI agents she didn't notice anyone or anything unusual when she found the note. She let them search her car, where they found a post-it note in the glove box with scribbled out words. The note was sent to experts for analysis. Following this discovery, they chose to release Melissa and shift their attention back to analyzing the original note found near the mailbox. Weeks went by, but authorities could not find any traces of Sandra. After 10 long days of searching for Sandra, her case took a shocking turn. The police chief told us that the person or persons responsible for the death of 8-year-old Sandra Cantu would be brought to justice. Sandra's death has devastated the community. Jose Luis Franco, a farm worker, found a locked black suitcase while draining a pond. The weight of the case sparked dread, and their fears were realized. Inside, Sandra's lifeless body was curled up, dressed in black leggings and a Hello Kitty shirt, with many cuts and wounds. A torn cloth was tied around her head, covered in blood, evoking shock and sorrow. Sandra's body was sent to undergo an autopsy to gather more information about her death. The results of the autopsy were devastating and added to the shock and horror surrounding her death. The autopsy revealed disturbing details. Sandra had been brutally assaulted, but there was no sign of any biological fluids. The injuries suggested that an unknown object had been used, and the cause of her death was asphyxiation. Furthermore, the coroner found a large amount of alprazolam in her system, indicating that she had been drugged. The official cause of death was recorded as homicide by asphyxiation. Sadly, it was discovered that she was murdered just hours after she was last seen on surveillance footage. a terrifying fact that sent shockwaves through the community. The description of the neighbor matched a woman named Melissa Huck. Investigators checked the CCTV camera at Sandra's house and confirmed that Melissa owned the same type of car. The footage showed Melissa getting into her SUV from a parking spot directly across the street from her house around 3:30 p.m. She drove towards her residence, which was located to the left of Sandra's house. Later, Melissa visited her grandparents' church before being seen by a resident near the pond at approximately 5:30 p.m. This timeline was surprising, as it established that Melissa was in the area around the time Sandra disappeared. The police had identified a prime suspect in the case, Melissa. They strongly believed she was the perpetrator and wanted to question her. However, when they approached her, they discovered that she had attempted to take her own life by swallowing razor blades. As a result, Melissa was hospitalized, and the police were forced to wait until she recovered before they could interrogate her. Once she was well enough, Melissa claimed to have no knowledge of the events surrounding the case and maintained that her only involvement was bringing the note to their attention. She told the officers that at 4 p.m. on the day Sandra was last seen, she had been at her church, decorating her classroom, and had not seen anything unusual in the area. The police unsurprisingly asked Melissa to confirm her alibi, which her phone records ultimately supported as crucial evidence. It turned out that Melissa had earlier called the police herself to report the theft of her suitcase from her driveway. She explained that after learning about Sandra's disappearance, she had even sent Maria a text message telling the police she had been robbed around 4 p.m., although she wasn't sure if that detail was significant. The stolen suitcase proved to be a crucial piece of evidence in the investigation. The black Eddie Bauer suitcase containing Sandra was identical to the one Melissa had reported stolen, which added to its significance. The note Melissa found not only mentioned a suitcase, but specifically referred to a stolen one. Although the authorities had gathered substantial evidence implicating Melissa, they sought additional information. They decided to wiretap her phone and waited patiently for her release from the hospital. 2 days later, when Melissa was discharged from the hospital, the police were stunned to discover that she had called the Cantu family. During their conversation, Melissa invited one of Sandra's siblings to her home to play with her supposedly 5-year-old daughter. Responding to her residence immediately, the officers found no children inside, suggesting that Melissa might have been planning to lure another young victim into her house. A second neighbor has come forward with a disturbing revelation. Just before Sandra's disappearance, Melissa had taken a 7-year-old girl from the neighborhood to the park without her parents' permission. When the child returned, she was disoriented, slurred her speech, and had trouble walking. Her parents took her to the hospital, where tests revealed she had been drugged with benzodiazepines, the same drug found in Sandra's body. Although Melissa denied giving the girl drugs, the incident raised suspicions. As the investigation continued, the police grew increasingly suspicious of Melissa. They were shocked to learn about the drugged child. Soon after, they obtained a warrant to search Melissa's trailer and her grandparents' church. During the trailer search, they found a notebook with handwriting that exactly matched the note Melissa had claimed to have found on the ground. This discovery provided a crucial link between Melissa and the note, leaving the police stunned. Later, experts analyzing the post-it note found in Melissa's car's glove box made a stunning revelation. The note featured cryptic words, including Bache Road, Whitehall Road, and water, which added a mysterious layer to the ongoing investigation. Furthermore, they discovered alprazolam in Melissa's purse, a drug prescribed to her, which matched the substance found in Sandra's body. During the 2009 search of Clover Road Baptist Church, a blood-stained rolling pin was found with Sandra's DNA. A draw cord was missing from a window blind, and the cord used on the Eddie Bauer suitcase matched the remaining church blinds. Melissa Huckabee, a 28-year-old Sunday school teacher, was arrested on April 10, 2009. Initially, she denied involvement, but later confessed, stating Sandra's death was an accident. She persuaded Sandra to enter a suitcase for a game with her daughter, and later found her lifeless body. Melissa claimed that she had played a game of hide-and-seek with Sandra, suggesting that Sandra hide in a suitcase and then jump out to surprise her own daughter and sister. Sandra allegedly agreed to the plan and zipped herself inside the suitcase. Melissa then said that she had forgotten Sandra was inside and didn't remember until she arrived at a church where she opened the case to find Sandra unresponsive. In a panic, Melissa attempted to perform CPR and used a small wet towel to cool Sandra's forehead, but admitted she didn't know how to handle the situation. Later, Melissa got rid of the suitcase containing Sandra's body in a nearby pond. However, the investigators found that Melissa was not telling the truth when they looked into her personal life and discovered a history of criminal activity, depression, and other mental health issues. Melissa's legal history was well documented, and court records revealed that she pleaded no contest to felony second-degree commercial burglary and misdemeanor property theft charges on January 9th. A criminal complaint highlighted her prior convictions, including a 2006 property theft conviction that resulted in jail time in Los Angeles County. In November 2008, she was accused of attempting to steal from a store while on probation in San Juan County and had a scheduled court date. Melissa had also filed for bankruptcy in 2003, citing credit card debt and medical expenses. Melissa's father said she struggled with depression and finding her path after college. Her ex-husband confirmed her depression and self-image issues, but described her as carefree. They married in 2003, separated in 2004, and divorced in 2005, with Melissa getting full custody of their 5-year-old daughter. John Huckabee was shocked when he learned that his ex-wife Melissa was involved in the murder of a young girl. He couldn't believe it, saying it's not something you want to think anyone is capable of, especially someone you know and who is the mother of your child. After they separated, Melissa moved to Southern California to live with her parents, which made it difficult for John to see his daughter. During a past custody battle, Melissa had made accusations against John, claiming he was guilty of alcohol abuse and domestic violence, which he strongly denied. John, who had lost touch with Melissa for over 3 years, was now seeking custody of their daughter. He had started a new family, remarrying and having 2 more children. However, the idea of Melissa being involved in the rape and murder of a child seemed impossible to comprehend. At trial, Melissa Huckabee showed emotion when the judge announced her crimes. Throughout, prosecutor Thomas Testa argued Melissa had planned Sandra's murder. He showed surveillance footage of Sandra heading to Melissa's house. Testa claimed Melissa drugged Sandra with juice at a church, then waited for her to pass out before attacking and suffocating her. The prosecutor, Thomas Testa, initially intended to push for the death penalty in the case against Melissa Huckabee because she had not admitted to the horrific crimes. But a turning point came during the trial when Melissa suddenly decided to plead guilty, accepting full responsibility for what she had done. During the trial, Judge Linda Loftus of San Juan County Superior Court questioned Melissa Huckabee to ensure she understood the consequences of pleading guilty. Judge Loftus asked Melissa if she had discussed the matter with her lawyers and if she was certain about giving up her right to a jury trial. Melissa affirmed that she had and reiterated her decision to plead guilty. After completing her questioning, prosecutor Thomas Testa expressed concerns about Melissa's mental health. He highlighted her unusual behavior in prison, including a recent incident where she attempted to harm herself, which raised questions about her ability to make rational decisions. Testa noted that Melissa appeared coherent and rational in court, but he was worried about her mental state in the long run. Melissa Huckabee's guilty plea was a pivotal moment in the case. By admitting her guilt, she brought some closure to the Cantu family, saving them from a long and painful trial. This significant development altered the course of the court proceedings and paved the way for what would happen next in Sandra's case. Melissa's guilty plea simplified the process and provided the Cantu family with some comfort after all they had endured since Sandra's tragic death. On June 14, 2010, Melissa Huckabee received a life sentence without parole for the first-degree murder and kidnapping of Sandra Cantu. The motivations behind Sandra's tragic death remain unclear. Prosecutors believed Melissa planned the crime to harm Sandra intentionally. Despite this, Melissa never disclosed her reasons, leaving investigators baffled. However, documents revealed a troubled individual with a history of depression, self-harm, and a difficult past. Melissa is now serving her life sentence at Sand County Jail, burdened by the gravity of her actions. Her imprisonment serves as a reminder that severe crimes have severe consequences. For the Cantu family, the pain of losing Sandra will never fully subside, but they find comfort in knowing justice has been served. The trial and conviction brought a sense of closure, ensuring Sandra's tragic death did not go unpunished. Hello friends, welcome to my channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Tristan Borlase. On April 10, 2019, a significant tragedy occurred involving 17-year-old Tristan Borlase. This teenager, from a devout family, violently attacked and killed his relatives at their home in Deep Gap, North Carolina. On that Wednesday evening, emergency services received a call from a young woman. She reported a large amount of blood in her home and mentioned that her parents and younger brother were missing. Attempts to reach them had been unsuccessful. Police officers immediately responded to the situation, driving to the family home in Deep Gap, located near the Watauga and Wilkes County border. Upon arrival, they discovered blood on the walkway leading to the house, on the mat by the front door, and trailing inside up the stairs. As officers searched outside the home, they found a man's body covered with leaves under a hammock. The man had multiple stab wounds. Later that night, at about 10:30 p.m., authorities found the family's pickup truck concealed in the woods. Inside was the woman's body covered with a blanket and bags of mulch placed on top of her. Jeffrey Borlase, Tristan's father, was born on April 16, 1975. He served as pastor of Pist Bible Fellowship Church, a conservative Protestant movement with Mennonite roots. Tristan grew up in an environment emphasizing personal piety and constant awareness of God's watchful eye. Serious Bible study sessions and moral instructions formed the basis of his upbringing. Even entertainment like laughter or colorful clothing was frowned upon within this community. Things such as good works, charity, missionary work, love for one's enemies, and renunciation of all forms of violence were highly valued virtues. Jeffrey upheld these principles as well, since he was raised under similar circumstances by Pastor Harry Boras. As a boy and young man, Jeffrey exemplified kindness, gentleness, and patience. During his youth as a young adult man, Jeffrey worked at Big Surf Water Park located on Lake of the Ozarks in Missouri during summer breaks from schooling routines back then. On his first day of work, the young man encountered a charming and meek girl named Tanya Mae Trandom. She was of the same age, had similar views, and shared almost identical upbringing with him. Tanya, like Jeffrey, was raised in a family where Christian values were of utmost importance. A patient and humble girl, she saw in the devout man an ideal future husband and a caring father. She gave Jeffrey a picture of an elderly couple holding hands and remarked, "That will be us one day." Jeffrey's mother, Kathy Brown, prayed earnestly that God would bless her son with a wife who loved the Lord wholeheartedly. She believed her prayers were answered when Jeffrey met Tanya. The young couple married and continued living according to the values they were taught in their own families. The photo presented by Tanya was carefully preserved in their family album. Soon after their marriage, the couple welcomed their first child, an adorable girl named Taylor. Not long after Taylor's birth came 3 more children, the youngest being a son named Tristan. Taylor embraced her role as the eldest sibling wholeheartedly. She took care of her brothers and sisters, constantly supporting them. Among all her siblings, she had a special bond with her younger brother Tristan. Despite their age difference, they were inseparable. Jeffrey and Tanya held firm beliefs about parenting, viewing it as their mission to instill Christian values in their children's hearts. As their 4 children grew older, they decided to extend their family further by adopting 4 more boys from an orphanage. Open-hearted and loving, according to others' descriptions, their family expanded to include 8 children: Taylor, twins Kay and Alexis, Misery, Ale, Stephen, Miku, and Tristan. In line with the family's religious beliefs, children were not permitted to use cell phones or social networks until reaching a certain age. They emphasized simplicity in needs and desires as well. Additionally, boys were forbidden to engage in romantic relationships until they completed high school at 18 years old. Bible study sessions and other religious activities were mandatory components of their upbringing. Despite these guidelines rooted in asceticism and discipline, the children grew up like any other boys and girls, with love and support from their devoted parents guiding them along the way. Parents made no distinction between native and adopted children. They all received the same attention, care, and affection. The loving mother fostered a harmonious atmosphere, carefully monitoring the internal relationships among brothers and sisters. She prayed frequently and engaged in various good deeds. The couple believed in nurturing virtue through their actions and instilled mercy in their children by setting an example. When a hurricane struck Haiti, Tanya sold her expensive wedding ring and donated the proceeds to a foundation dedicated to building housing for the victims. In place of her costly ring, she acquired a simple, modest one. In 2015, Taylor graduated from high school and moved to Boone to attend Appalachian State University. This event was particularly difficult for Tristan, as he lost his closest companion and found himself alone. Although Taylor returned home at every opportunity, she now had her own independent life, leaving Tristan with the same old rules and routines that he'd always opposed. Tristan had long rebelled against the restrictions his parents imposed since childhood and disagreed with their religious views. He was particularly frustrated by the lack of a cell phone and the inability to connect with peers on social networks, an integral part of modern teenage life. After Taylor's departure, quarrels with his parents increased. In December 2017, there were significant changes within the family's life. Jeffrey, his wife, and their children moved to a new house with a large lot in Deep Gap, Watauga County, North Carolina. The house was situated on a dirt road leading into a wooded area and offered much more space than their previous home. Additionally, it was located just under 2 miles from Robin's residence, Tanya's mother, and the children's grandmother, making it easy to seek her help when needed for looking after the youngest children. He attended the local high school and began participating in and field. Other kids took jobs as counselors at summer camps. At first glance, it might have seemed that there was never any trouble in the Borlas household. Over time, Tristan's behavior became troubling. In 2018, the school insisted on several consultations with a psychologist due to anger issues and a lack of control. By 2019, when Tristan was in high school, he started having trouble understanding some school subjects. These difficulties grew with each passing day. From being a diligent student who always participated in school activities before the move, he turned into an indifferent and withdrawn teenager with a lack of interest in his studies. Tristan began arriving late for lessons and showed no desire to learn at all. It got to the point where he would put his headphones on during class and sit with an absent expression. Some teachers tried to help Tristan, and he even made contact, but everything ended with unchanged indifference. At home, Tristan's behavior also became a concern. By this time, he had everything but constantly argued with his parents about his cell phone and access to social networks. He spent considerable time on the internet. On his Instagram account, he referred to himself as a musician. His sister Taylor remained interested in her siblings' lives and noticed that Tristan quarreled more frequently with their parents and argued about religious topics with their mother. She also learned of his other problems at school. The sister attempted to talk to her brother, but realized their former closeness was gone. After some time, Tristan befriended a girl from the religious community named Evelyn Faith Jackson. They began meeting without particularly observing prohibitions on intimate relations. Sometimes they even smoked forbidden substances together. Tristan expressed complaints about his mother's nightly discussions regarding his behavior, which left him feeling tired and unable to concentrate in school. The young man grew very concerned that many of his faults caused him not to live up to his mother's expectations. She can't take pride in him, told that he can be himself with his father, but it's different with his mother. On April 10, 2019, a lot of secrets from Tristan's life came to light. Surveillance cameras were installed in the barn. Tristan's old cell phone, which he occasionally used without his parents knowing, was used as an access point. On this particular day, Tanya took the phone for some reason and discovered text messages indicating her son was having inappropriate conversations with girls and discussing illegal drugs. Tristan was at school when he noticed his phone blinking with incoming messages. His shocked parents confronted him through a family chat about what they had found on the old phone. That same day, Sher King, an English teacher in Tristan's class, called his mother to complain about his grades and behavior. During the trial, it was revealed that Tanya Borlas had called Miss King back, informing her that she and her husband would soon come to the school to pick Tristan up to discuss his academic performance. Miss King conveyed this message to Tristan, who was quite surprised by the news. The couple left their youngest child with his grandmother and headed to the middle school to address these issues. The ride home was silent. At trial, Tristan testified that his mother appeared tense and frowned frequently while going through his phone. A conversation ensued at home for about an hour and a half. Afterward, Tanya texted her mother stating that although they had taken away Tristan's phone and car keys until his grades and behavior improved, he did not seem upset by this. She informed her mother that she would be coming soon to pick up the younger child. This message was sent at 4 p.m., after which it seems the discussion continued. From Tristan's account, he and his mother talked about the importance of doing well in school and maintaining cleanliness at home. He was forced to listen and realized there was a lot in him needing correction. They even made a list of qualities should develop to become a better person: compassion, honesty. This list would later be found by the police. At one point, Tristan said his mother approached him from behind, put her arm around his neck, and applied pressure. He instinctively jumped up, turned around, and accidentally her. According to him, his mother had never done anything like that before, so he reacted that way. His mother was startled by the blow, grabbed what he thought were scissors from a shelf, and moved toward her son. In shock at what was happening, he stabbed her thinking he was defending himself and ran to his father for help. Later forensic examination found no evidence on Tristan's neck, indicating his mother strangled him. During the trial, the prosecution showed photos of Tristan Borlas's neck taken by the medical examiner that displayed a broken neck bone. On the other hand, the psychologist would explain during the trial that in his opinion Tristan Borlas was mentally sane at the time of the crime, but suffered from a severely impaired cognitive state. He was experiencing depersonalization, derealization, and felt events were unreal. However, the court and jury, they would disregard the psychologist's opinion, finding Tristan to be a skillful manipulator and socially dangerous individual. According to Tristan, he did not understand what was happening, or why his father was running away from him, or why he stabbed him when he caught up even though he begged for help. He remembered his father picking up a rock saying, "Tristan, don't," but thought his father would rather let him be killed than try to harm him. Neighbors later reported hearing loud screams on the Borlas property at about 5:30 p.m. that Wednesday. After it was over, Tristan returned to the house where he vomited, indicating severe stress, not cold-blooded, calculated murder in the psychologist's opinion. The jury disagreed with the psychologist's opinion because they had seen the forensic medical examiner's reports during the trial. Jeffrey B.'s autopsy report detailed multiple stab wounds to his left chest back, slash wounds his arms and hands, and abrasions his skull and forehead. Tanya Borla's autopsy report showed that she had multiple wounds in her left chest and arm, while as injuries likely sustained from neck compression. These findings suggested that the parents were defending themselves rather than attacking. Tristan had an opportunity to escape from his mother if he felt threatened. Even if the mother experienced a sudden lapse of judgment or misperceived self-defense, the father's murder and subsequent actions appeared different. Tristan returned home, removed his mother's body, placed it in a truck under a tarp, cleaned the crime scene for about an hour, and even used a hose to wash down the porch. Around 8:30 p.m., Tristan went to his grandmother's house to pick up his younger brother. His brother Robin thought this was very strange. Tristan explained that his parents urgently needed to go to the store and apologized for not having time to stop by to pick up his brother. About 20 minutes later, Robin received a call from another grandson who complained that their parents were not answering the phone and hadn't come to pick him up from work as usual. Grandma called Alexis and asked her to retrieve her brother. They agreed to meet at Jeffrey and Tanya's house to figure out what had happened. When they arrived at the house, Robin noticed blood on the porch, but wasn't overly concerned since the couple raised animals there. She went inside to get a flashlight to check on them and discovered blood everywhere. At this point, Alexis ran into the house reporting she found some kind of body under a hammock near the animal barn and thought she saw Tristan with blood on his face in a getaway car. Alexis called emergency services. The operator instructed her and all family members to lock themselves in the car and wait for the police. The police arrived 10 minutes later. After several hours of waiting outside and talking to officers, they were taken to the station where they were informed that Jeffrey and Tanya Barassi had been found dead. While examining the crime scene, detectives found a computer interface in the home. It connected the video surveillance system inside the house to the monitors. Detectives saw a screen with a grid of various cameras broadcasting live video feeds. They immediately requested a warrant to obtain credentials from the servicing company. Meanwhile, Tristan contacted his girlfriend Evelyn and went over to her home. She noticed he seemed worried and had a few scratches on his forehead and arms. Tristan assured her that he had only argued with his parents and got the scratches while playing with his dog. Evelyn described Tristan's injuries: 3 scratches on his forehead, a wound on his hand, a cut on his finger, and a bruised fingernail. Right after the crime, Tristan posted a photo of his injuries on Snapchat, saying he was hurt by his father's dog. According to Evelyn, this photo matched what she saw that evening. Tristan stayed over that night. The next morning, they went to Walmart and McDonald's, but decided against going to school. Evelyn thought Tristan just wanted some time away from his parents, so she suggested staying with one of her relatives for a while. He agreed, and they traveled to another state. On April 11th, Sheriff's Office personnel obtained the username and password to the Barassi home's video surveillance system. After reviewing the camera footage, they learned about the circumstances of the crime. Police obtained a warrant for Tristan's arrest and turned over details about their vehicle. He allegedly drove away to the National Crime Information Center. A search of the car began, and soon after, a chase ensued. Investigator Matthew received intel that Tristan had been spotted in Tennessee and quickly began the paperwork necessary to catch the alleged perpetrator. He requested Robin, Tristan's grandmother, to accompany him during the apprehension so he could speak to Tristan in her presence due to his young age. As they were driving with Evelyn, Tristan noticed blue lights trailing them. He accelerated and told his friend that his parents must have registered the car as stolen to locate him. Speeding down the highway, he tried to evade capture, but eventually pulled over when he couldn't escape his pursuers any longer. The Ford was quickly surrounded by police cars. Evelyn was utterly confused upon witnessing her boyfriend being handcuffed and taken away in a squad car. The officers observed that Tristan did not appear particularly upset or agitated. On April 11, 2019, investigator Matthew conducted an interview with Tristan. It was both videotaped and audio recorded. The young man answered all questions, confessed to the crime, and detailed his actions in full, occasionally breaking into tears. Tristan Boris, who was just a month shy of his 18th birthday, was taken into custody without bail. Shortly thereafter, the sheriff's office secured a warrant to search Tristan's Snapchat account, along with 5 cell phones that could contain pertinent information related to the crime. Another warrant was issued for the Orchard Road home, where detectives discovered another phone in the master bedroom, alongside various items including a keyboard, pen from a safe, paper cups, hammer, straw, knives, red-stained swab eyeglasses, kitchen towel hammock, digital video recorder, rug, and miscellaneous papers, South Dakota cards, boots. According to court documents, a search warrant was also issued for the Ford F-150 truck, where investigators seized a red-stained swab laptop, top computer charger, and steering wheel cover. Additionally, authorities obtained a warrant to search the home of Tristan's girlfriend in Boone, since he had spent the night at her house. Court documents state that a pillowcase, a zippered sweatshirt, and a notebook were seized from the property. The findings from the investigations and searches enabled investigators to piece together the chronology of events in great detail. The claim of self-defense was found to be untenable. Funeral services for the couple took place on April 17, 2019, at Bible Fellowship Church, with pastors William C.R. and Brad Gray officiating the ceremony. The children, grappling with the loss of their parents at such a young age, managed to write an emotive obituary. "Our parents never got the opportunity to live for themselves because they always lived for us. Jeff and Tanya have always brought immense joy and pride to their parents. Our parents made the world a better place, and we aim to continue that legacy by passionately loving people and pursuing faith." After the funeral, Taylor visited her brother in prison for the first time and was taken aback by his demeanor. Tristan showed no remorse and attempted to lay blame on the family for the incident. To his sister, it appeared he believed he would regain his freedom eventually. Disgusted, Taylor left. Her second visit was on May 11th for Tristan's birthday, accompanied by Grandma Robin. However, this meeting fared no better than the last. Her brother boasted about a party thrown for him in prison to celebrate his birthday, a behavior Taylor found unacceptable considering their parents' tragic death. Following this visit, the family decided to sever all contact with Tristan. The trial began on February 16, 2022. During proceedings, Tristan expressed regret for what had transpired and concurred with everything his family had said about him. He supported a permanent ban on contact to ensure his family's sense of safety. On March 3rd, Tristan Bohr was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole for each count of first-degree murder. Judge Horn noted that mental health issues were considered as somewhat mitigating factors during sentencing. According to the psychologist's report, Tristan Borlas continues to suffer from anxiety, depression, and exhibits symptoms consistent with post-traumatic stress disorder. However, Judge Horn noted that the psychologist found no indication of psychotic disorders. Although the anxiety and depression may have been exacerbated by continued drug use, what's particularly unusual in this case is that neither Tristan's family, nor his lawyer, nor he himself provided any statements about his motives behind the crime. Here we have a perplexing situation: a devout family with a socially dangerous individual who abused illegal drugs and couldn't fully grasp or articulate the reasons for his actions. On one hand, there's a young man with low self-esteem who exhibits symptoms of anxiety and hasn't received adequate medical care. During the court session, it was mentioned that his mother helped him cope with panic attacks since she experienced them herself. One foundational principle of certain educational theories posits that children burdened with original sin are inherently immoral from birth. Therefore, education must correct them by imposing strict discipline and suppressing their self-awareness. This so-called strict love is supposedly beneficial for children. Tristan might have had an inherited overreactivity of the nervous system and grew up under stringent limits, constantly feeling inadequate as a devout individual. Some require more love, while others require less. According to recollections shared by his older sister, Tristan was intensely jealous of new siblings who diverted parental attention away from him. Initially rebellious, he then sank into depression and feelings of worthlessness, compounded by illicit drug use and subsequent panic attacks, as well as depersonalization, derealization states. He couldn't embrace his parents' devotion to their faith and couldn't meet his mother's expectations or align with what she envisioned for him, which required correction. Instead of securing a competent therapist's assistance as needed, changes were listed together by him and his mother. This approach may have missed critical opportunities to address underlying issues. Could this senseless and tragic event have been avoided in a truly loving family? That remains uncertain, a question echoic in the aftermath. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. On the morning of October 26, 1997, a Sunday at around 10:30 a.m., the body of a woman was found by 3 schoolchildren washed up on the shore of the River Humber. Her body had been placed in the river at a site accessed via a street called Brickyard Lane. She was naked from the waist down, except for part of her tights and a boot, which were both still on her feet. The body was identified as that of Samantha Class, who was only 29 years old at the time of her death. She was a mother of 3 and a much-loved daughter to her own mother. Samantha had been working as a prostitute the previous evening. Police investigated Gary Arthur Allen was born 27th of September 1973. He claimed that he was with Samantha the day she was murdered. Allen told police that during the night of October 25th, he picked up Samantha Class on Porter Street in Hull City Center in his Ford Escort. He had agreed to pay her £30 for full sexual intercourse. He said he had driven to an area near Walker Street, which is also in Hull, and had sex with Samantha in his car. He claimed that the condom he had been using split, and Samantha had become angry. After putting her stockings and underwear back on, she left his vehicle and walked off. He claimed that the two of them had no further problems. He said he did not hurt her. However, the day after the crime, Allen took some rather suspicious actions that could be seen as an attempt to cover up potentially incriminating evidence. In particular, he decided to get rid of his vehicle. At first, he claimed that he did this because he was frightened after seeing a news report that a woman he had been with the previous day was dead. However, it is unclear if this claim can be verified, as there is evidence to suggest that Allen took the initial steps to dispose of his car before the first news stories about Sam's death had been broadcast on television. 2 days after Samantha's body was discovered in the river, on the 28th of October, Allen sold his car to scrap dealers for £25. Notably, the car had only been registered a month earlier on the 3rd of October, and he had bought it for £50. This raises the question of why he was in such a hurry to get rid of the vehicle. Evidence suggested that Sam's body had been dragged from a car to the location where it was found in the water. The cause of death was strangulation by a ligature. 33 injuries or groups of injuries were noted. One injury to the arm was consistent with infliction by the tire of a car, suggesting she had been driven over by one. Additionally, massive internal injuries were noted. The pathologist, Dr. Ruddy, concluded that Samantha had been the victim of a blunt force assault, following which she was strangled to death and then run over. Dr. Ruddy estimated that the time of death was possibly prior to midnight on the 26th of October, but it may have been later. On the night of her tragic demise, Samantha Class's lifeless body was discovered, and a thorough examination of her undergarments, which were retrieved from the crime scene, revealed no discernible traces of male DNA. However, upon further investigation, the presence of semen from 2 unidentified males was detected within her body. One of these individuals came forward and admitted to having been intimate with Samantha a few days prior to her untimely death. But after questioning, he was promptly eliminated as a suspect in the ongoing police investigation. The identity of the second male remained a mystery until July 1998, when Gary Allen was apprehended for driving under the influence of alcohol. It was during this arrest that Allen's DNA was collected and subsequently entered into the police database. Upon comparing the DNA evidence, it was determined that Allen's genetic profile was a match to the second set of semen found on Samantha's body. According to the expert opinion of the forensic scientist assigned to the case, it was concluded that Samantha's undergarments had not been put back on her body following the most recent sexual encounter. Moreover, it was discovered that Allen was well acquainted with the specific location where Samantha's body was found, as he had previously resided on Brickyard Lane with his aunt when he was just 16 years old. Despite the compelling evidence linking Allen to the crime scene, a crucial piece of evidence in the form of the vehicle present at the time of the murder was not available for examination. Nonetheless, the police were confident that they had apprehended the right suspect, and on November 17, 1998, Gary Allen was formally arrested and charged with the murder of Samantha Class. Over the course of the investigation, Allen was subjected to 5 separate interviews with the police as they built a case against him. Eventually, Allen conceded that he had indeed picked up Samantha on the evening of her murder. However, despite this admission and the mounting evidence pointing to his guilt, the jury was not entirely convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that they could convict Allen of the crime. Throughout the trial, Allen was accused of lying and deceiving the court, and apparently, he did so quite effectively. In January 2000, Gary Allen was acquitted of the murder of Samantha Class, leaving her family and loved ones without the closure and justice they so desperately sought. Local press commentary at the time of the crime described Allen as a psychopath with a dangerous aversion to women. Similarly, a book on sex work and violence in the UK quoted experts who warned that Allen would attack as soon as he was asked for money. Unfortunately, this accurate assessment proved true in the following years. In the month of February, Allen relocated from his residence in the northern region of England to the city of Plymouth, situated in the southern part of the country. Not long after Allen had settled into his new surroundings, 2 vicious attacks took place in Plymouth, one occurring in March and the other following in April. These brutal assaults bore striking similarities to the tragic fate that befell Samantha Class, as they targeted female individuals engaged in sex work and involved the horrific act of strangulation. The first of these heinous crimes transpired on the 29th day of March, a mere 35 days after Allen had been exonerated of any wrongdoing in the murder of Samantha. On that fateful day, Allen approached a woman who was working as a sex worker in Plymouth at the time. He expressed his desire for oral sex, to which she consented. However, once the two had relocated to a more secluded location, Allen suddenly and violently seized the woman by her neck, applying a crushing force to her throat while simultaneously pulling her down to the ground with his hand, leaving her utterly helpless and gasping for air. He insisted that he should not have to pay for any sexual services rendered. In a fit of rage, he forcefully struck her on the head with his closed fist, then proceeded to restrain her on the ground by pinning her down with his body weight. As she lay there helpless, he forcibly shoved his hand into her mouth, causing her to gag and choke. Throughout this brutal assault, he repeatedly berated her, calling her vile names and telling her that she was the lowest form of life on the planet, the very scum of the earth. This savage and terrifying attack only came to an end when a passerby happened to interrupt, causing Allen to flee the scene. The woman was left traumatized, with visible injuries including trauma to the inside of her mouth, dark bruises on her body, and deep scratches marring her face. A couple of weeks later, again in Plymouth, he approached a second woman working as a prostitute in the city's red light district. When she requested payment up front, he put his arm around her neck and squeezed her throat with the crook of his elbow. He then dragged her backwards, put his hand over her mouth. Allen punched her in the head repeatedly, before running off following the arrival of the police. Allen was located and charged with both assaults. On September 21st, he was convicted of indecent assault and assault occasioning actual bodily harm, and on December 8th of the same year, he was sentenced to 5 years and 6 months imprisonment with an extended license period of 4 years and 6 months. Allen was released on license twice, a form of release in England, similar to parole, where a prison sentence is shortened and the individual is released with certain restrictions imposed on their movements and behavior. In 2003, during an interview with probation officers, Allen spoke openly about his mindset. The officers reported that during his time in custody, he outright refused to participate in any rehabilitation or sex offender treatment programs. Numerous psychiatric reports concluded that he posed a high risk of sexual reoffending. While serving his sentence, Gary Allen admitted to the probation service that he had carried out and planned both attacks. He also said that the attacks would have been worse had he not been disturbed, and that he had not inflicted as much injury as he intended because he had been drunk. He openly admitted that he experienced absolutely no feelings of guilt or regret for his actions. After being freed from incarceration, Allen made his way back to the region of Humberside. The police, clearly worried about the potential consequences of Allen's newly acquired liberty, initiated a covert investigation, which they referred to as Operation Misty. The primary objective of this operation was to confirm Allen's culpability in the tragic passing of Sam Class in 1997, notwithstanding the fact that he had been exonerated by a jury trial. Furthermore, the authorities firmly maintained that the operation was of utmost necessity in order to safeguard both individuals engaged in the sex trade and the wider community from any conceivable future acts of violence that Allen might perpetrate. Operation Misty would produce more than 400 hours of secret recordings to gather evidence. These recordings were made in part by Allen's new friend, Ian, an undercover operator with the police. Allen first met Ian on the 19th of October 2010, approximately 6 months after he was released. Ian's cover identity was that of an experienced criminal on the run from other criminals after seriously wounding a rival. On the 6th of December 2010, Allen confessed to the murder of Samantha to his new friend. He said that, "Well, I'll tell you the truth, but you're probably not going to want to know me afterward. But if you want to know, I'll tell you. The truth of the matter is that 9 years ago, when I was depressed, I had sex with prostitutes about 4 or 5 times over a few years because of the depression and stuff. I had sex with this prostitute one night, and the condom split, and she said she want my name, she want my address, the money, and everything else, or she gonna tell the police that I raped her. So I strangled her and dumped her in the Humber. Seriously. Anyway, the police have DNA and that, but I went on the database. The reason I went on the database is because I'm never in any trouble. You know, I've not led a criminal lifestyle at all. So, anyway, I got done for drink driving, and they got the DNA that way. And they arrested me, and I went to court and everything, and I just said, listen, yeah, I had sex with her last night, and the condom broke. But that was it, as far as I'm concerned. She went on her way, and I went on my way. I went to Sheffield Crown Court and was found not guilty. I had a mate living in Plymouth who I've since fallen out with because of his wife. The police were so desperate to get evidence that they were interviewing everybody I'd known, even people I hadn't spoken to, because they had nothing on me. All they had was the fact that I had sex with her. Well, no, because with that Samantha Class incident, as I said, I told you what happened there. The condom split, and she said, if you don't give me this, that, and the other, and if you don't start giving me money, I'm gonna tell the police you raped me. I just flipped and killed her, then dumped her body. But that's just the way I was back then. You know what I mean? Gary Allen would insist that his confessions were simply not true. He later claimed, conveniently, that the claims he made on these recordings about house burglaries, assaulting police officers, and the killing of Samantha were all fabrications. When asked why he would make up these stories, he said, "I just wanted to pass myself off as criminally minded." The BBC would report that he aimed to big himself up to impress Ian. Apparently, he just wanted to sound like a tough guy to his criminal friend Ian, or so he would later claim. It is somewhat unbelievable, given this series of events, that Gary Allen found himself a free man during Christmas time of 2018. At this time, Allen was living in Rotherham, which is a large town in South Yorkshire. It was there that he would meet Elena Grilikova. Allen was now 45 years old, and Elena was 38 and from Slovakia. She had moved to South Yorkshire in 2008 with her husband and 4 children, who were between the ages of 12 and 19. Elena was at a very low point in her life, having separated from her family, drinking excessively and taking drugs. To support her addiction, she had turned to prostitution, trading sexual favors with various men in exchange for alcohol, cash, and even a place to stay. They first encountered each other in the summer of 2018, and she subsequently made multiple visits to his apartment. Allen engaged in sexual activities with her and provided her with alcohol and other items. Elena was last seen alive late on the evening of December 26th, the same day she had shown up at Allen's apartment unannounced, much to his displeasure. The ensuing dispute was captured on audio. More than 3 months later, in April 2019, Elena's body was found in a stream in Rotherham. She was partially buried and unclothed. Her head had been forced into an unnaturally extended position, and her genital region was visible. Gravel or grit had been placed over parts of her body along with some stones. Allen had attempted to cover and hide the body from being discovered. The investigation revealed that he had visited the location where the body was left twice in the 3 months prior to its discovery. When Elena's body was found, it was highly decomposed. However, after a thorough examination by the pathologist Dr. Carter, it was evident that Elena had also died from a neck injury. She had been strangled, just like Samantha Class. Allen was arrested and was set to face trial for Elena's murder. As the trial date approached, prosecutors took action to finally seek justice for Sam as well. They argued to the Court of Appeals that Allen's previous acquittal should be overturned and that a retrial should be ordered for Gary Allen for the death of Samantha Class alongside Elena Grilikova. However, it raises a question. Since Allen had already been tried the Sam Class case and was acquitted, is it appropriate for prosecutors to request a retrial? In the United States, the Double Jeopardy Clause of the Fifth Amendment is intended to safeguard citizens from their government, alongside other amendments to the U.S. Constitution that protect individual rights. Basically, when prosecuting criminal cases, the government generally has greater power and access to better resources than a typical defendant. Double jeopardy prevents the government from using this power to harass a citizen through multiple proceedings and trials for the same offense. But what about a man like Gary Allen? He was a violent misogynist who refused opportunities to rehabilitate, repeatedly reoffended, and brutally attacked vulnerable women without restraint or remorse over a period of decades. The law in England relating to double jeopardy was amended in 2003. Part 10 of the Criminal Justice Act permits retrials for a number of very serious offenses where new and compelling evidence has come to light. Previously, the law did not allow a person who had been acquitted or convicted of an offense to be retried for that same offense. The premise of this change is that if new evidence is brought forward, such as DNA testing or an outright confession by the acquitted, the interests of the public are best served by appealing for a retrial and finally seeking to achieve the justice and closure that the victim's family and friends deserve. Upon appeal to the court, the decision was made. In June 2021, after a 7-week trial, a jury found Gary Allen guilty of killing both Elena and Sam. After the verdict, one of Sam's children, her daughter Sophia, told the BBC News Service that the death of her mother had left her and her family broken into pieces. She described Samantha as caring, gentle, and strong. It took 24 years for Sophia and the rest of her family to receive their justice. At Alan's sentencing, the judge highlighted the grief caused by the crimes. He said to Alan, "The profound and lifelong grief which has been caused to them by your wicked murder of their mother, their wife, their sister, or their daughter is almost palpable." Gary Allen was then given a sentence of imprisonment for life, with a minimum sentence of 37 years in prison. So, what do you think of the concept of double jeopardy and how it played out in this case? Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Jassy Correa. In 2019, Jassy Correa, a 22-year-old woman, had planned to celebrate her 23rd birthday with friends at an entertainment venue in Boston. However, she never returned home after their meeting. Her disappearance made headlines on many American TV channels. Born in the U.S., Jassy moved to Massachusetts with her father when she was 3. She grew up in Dorchester, Boston, and later became a loving mother to her daughter, Gabriella. Despite her tough personal life, Jassy's love for her family, friends, and daughter remained unwavering. About a year before her disappearance, her partner, Miguel Castro, who was Gabriella's father, attacked her. Jassy wanted to leave him, but Miguel refused to let her go, beating her severely instead. She eventually reported the incident to the police, and the court sentenced Miguel to 4 years in prison. Jassy worked as a waitress at Del Frisco, a Boston restaurant. She had a passion for dancing and photography. The young mother cherished her time with her loved ones, often taking her daughter to the park. On the evening of Saturday, February 23, 2019, Jassy left her 2-year-old daughter with her family to celebrate her birthday with friends at Venue, a nightclub in Boston's Theater District on Warrington Street. She wore her new orange jumpsuit and enjoyed herself. A few days later, her friend told the police that they had spent the night dancing and drinking champagne at the club. After it closed, Jassy and her 2 friends stepped outside. However, they eventually went their separate ways, leaving Jassy alone. She failed to return home that night, and her phone was turned off, with all calls going straight to voicemail. There was no news from Jassy on Sunday or Monday. In fact, no one had seen her since she left the nightclub early Sunday morning. Concerned, her father, Wen Correa, accompanied by one of Jassy's friends, reported her disappearance to the police on Tuesday, February 26th. The police subsequently launched an investigation into her disappearance. The detectives' first priority was to establish where Jassy went after leaving the nightclub. Her family and friends handed out information flyers to pedestrians and around the city, hoping someone would come forward with valuable information. The detectives questioned Jassy's friends who were with her that night, but this didn't yield much progress in the investigation since they didn't know where she had gone after leaving the club. They bid each other farewell, and Jassy planned to head home. The police spoke to witnesses and analyzed CCTV footage from cameras inside the club and on nearby streets. One recording showed Jassy on the sidewalk on Tremont Street near the nightclub at 2:14 a.m., where she interacted with several people. This was after she left the nightclub. The footage also revealed Jassy, who appeared to be intoxicated, getting into an Uber she hadn't ordered. The young woman mistakenly entered the wrong car, which prompted an argument with the driver, who eventually pushed her out of the vehicle. What caught the investigators' attention next was the following incident. After being kicked out of the car, the girl continued to argue with the driver. At this point, a stranger approached her and took her hand. He led her a short distance away, and they began discussing something. It seemed she wanted to leave, but the man wouldn't release her hand. On the recording, they can be seen standing on the sidewalk, and the man, still holding Jassy's hands, pulled her towards him. A closer look at the CCTV footage revealed that Jassy left the area with this man. Knowing how the story unfolded, it's clear she fell prey to an opportunist who took advantage of the situation. Further CCTV footage showed Jassy jumped onto the man's back, and he carried her to his car. They then got into the vehicle and drove away. 14 minutes later, the police faced a multitude of unanswered questions. Who was the man who had taken Jassy, and where had he gone? Fortunately, they were able to rapidly identify the man's name and address. The individual with whom Jassy was last seen was revealed to be 32-year-old Lewis Coleman. Having grown up in a reputable family, Coleman had, according to certain sources, obtained a master's degree in physics and had no prior run-ins with the law. A search of the police database yielded no evidence that Coleman owned a vehicle. However, his mother, a California resident, possessed a red 2016 Buick, which was the exact make and model of car in which Coleman had placed Jassy. Coleman lived in Providence, Rhode Island, roughly 50 miles from the Venue nightclub. When the police arrived at his home, they found he was no longer there. CCTV footage from inside and outside the building confirmed the police's and Jassy's family's worst fears. The drive from the Venue Club to Coleman's apartment in Providence typically takes about an hour, which suggests he made a stop somewhere. He returned to his apartment on Sunday at 4:15 a.m., approximately 2 hours after he had put Jassy in his car. The next day, Coleman sent an email to his colleagues, informing them he would be away for a few more days. Based on his email, it appears he needed time to cover his tracks after the crime, which is exactly what he attempted to do over the next 2 days. We will now examine additional CCTV footage to understand what happened to Jassy after she left with Coleman. Although the police never released the initial recording due to ethical reasons, it showed Coleman entering his apartment with Jassy. The lobby CCTV footage reveals that at around 4:27 a.m., Coleman carried a woman who was either unconscious or already deceased into the building and then got into the elevator and went up to the 6th floor. On Tuesday, February 26th, the same day Jassy's father reported her disappearance to the police, Coleman was caught on cameras at Walmart. The list of goods he purchased was very telling. The receipts obtained by the police indicated that he had bought various items, including 3 Tyvek suits, duct tape, 2 candles, electrical tape, a mask, surgical gloves, 2 pairs of safety goggles, a respirator, and the CLN release bleach bath. On February 27th, while family and friends handed out flyers with Jassy's photo to people walking by, Coleman returned to Walmart. Security footage from 9:22 p.m. shows him pushing a cart containing some distinctive items. This time he purchased a large suitcase and a canister. Later that evening, at around 9:58 p.m., Coleman was seen on video entering his apartment building with what appeared to be a new large suitcase. The next footage, taken on February 28th at 2:15 a.m., shows Coleman wheeling the suitcase out of his apartment towards the elevator and into the parking lot, where he loaded it into his vehicle. The footage speaks for itself. Coleman struggled to lift a suitcase into his car trunk. Over a period of about an hour and a half, from 2:44 a.m. to 4:02 a.m., Coleman allegedly made multiple trips out of the building, each time carrying various items, including cardboard boxes, trash bags, a bottle of bleach, a computer tower, a black laptop case, and a small duffel bag. Jassy Correa has been missing from Coleman's apartment since the morning of February 24th. Later, on February 28, 2019, U.S. Attorney for Massachusetts, Andrew Lelling, informed reporters that a search warrant had been obtained for Coleman's apartment. The search yielded 2 packages of hooded coveralls and 2 respirator masks. Additionally, investigators examined a sofa with 4 large cushions, one of which was missing its cover. Outside the apartment complex, investigators discovered a dumpster containing various items, including white trash bags, a bag of plastic sheets, a pair of men's jeans with bleach stains and a belt, a white nylon hooded coverall, an empty box of baking soda, clear safety goggles, duct tape packaging, rubbing alcohol, Walmart bags, used plastic gloves, an empty package from a car air freshener, 3 used packages of purifying charcoal, and a sponge. On February 28, 2019, police officers pulled over Coleman's car near Wilmington, Delaware, in the afternoon. They ordered him out of the vehicle and asked if anyone else was with him. According to some sources, Coleman responded that she was in the trunk of the vehicle. Upon searching the car, officers found Jassie's body wrapped in a sofa cushion cover, which was inside a black trash bag contained within a large suitcase that matched the one Coleman had brought into his apartment the previous day, February 27, 2019. Following an examination of the car, experts discovered cracks on the passenger side of the windshield, suggesting to the police that the man had assaulted Jassie inside the vehicle. Coleman was subsequently arrested and taken to a Delaware State Police barracks, where a large bandage covered the right side of his face. When questioned about the bandage, he allegedly attributed it to the girl. A forensic investigation revealed that Jassie's cause of death was strangulation and blunt force trauma. Seminal fluid was found on her body, and DNA analysis matched it to Coleman's. Although the exact location of Jassie's death remains unknown, experts speculate that it could have occurred either in the car or at Coleman's apartment. Jassie's sudden death came as a shock to her family, leaving her 2-year-old daughter motherless. Following her death, representatives from the Boston authorities visited the Correa family, promising to seek justice for Jass. On Saturday, March 9, 2019, members of Jassie's grieving family and community gathered at St. Peter's Parish in Dorchester to bid her farewell. Many wore all-white attire, while others wore buttons, shirts, and sweatshirts bearing Jassie's face and the phrase, "Justice for Jassie." Jassie's cousin and best friend, Makadi Andrade, delivered a heartfelt eulogy conveying the family's sorrow and trust in God. Boston Mayor Marty Walsh spoke, pledging to work towards creating a safer world for women, where young women can go out at night, celebrate their birthdays with friends, and return home safely to their children and families. No family should ever have to endure what Jassie's family has gone through. When Correa, Jassie's father, thanked the crowd of over 200 people gathered at the church, Jassie's mother, who lived in Portugal and had not seen her daughter in 20 years, was also in attendance. The grief-stricken parents prepared to lay their 23-year-old daughter to rest. The church was packed, with people lining the back wall. When Correa expressed gratitude to the city for its support and to the law enforcement agencies and departments from 3 states that had dedicated considerable resources to their mission, he bid a final farewell, saying, "Rest in paradise, my dear Jass. Rest in peace, my dear child." Lewis Coleman faced a charge of kidnapping resulting in death, which could have led to the death penalty or a life sentence. However, in November 2019, prosecutors announced that they would not seek capital punishment. During the trial, prosecutors presented various pieces of evidence, including a video showing Coleman dragging Jassie Correa's body into his apartment in Providence and his online search history in the days following her disappearance. The FBI agents testified about Coleman's online searches, which included queries like, "Can a person fit in a suitcase?" and "How to pull a tooth out that is not loose." Coleman's legal team argued that the evidence presented by the prosecution had little to no relevance to the kidnapping charge against him. They claimed that the prosecution's evidence primarily focused on Coleman's actions after Correa's death, which were illegal or inappropriate, but did not prove the kidnapping allegation. As attorney David H. stated, "None of these things are determinant of the elements of the kidnapping allegation." Motions filed by both the prosecution and defense provide a detailed account of the events surrounding Jassie Correa's disappearance and the subsequent discovery of her lifeless body. While the two sides present differing narratives, the documents reveal chilling details about the tragic events that unfolded and the circumstances leading to Jassie's death. Prosecutors established that Coleman was present at the same nightclub as Jassie and her friends. Within the club, he socialized with a woman he had just met, engaging in conversation, dancing, and even exchanging phone numbers. The two individuals texted each other while still at the club and continued to do so after its closure. Prosecutors and the defense team presented two opposing viewpoints. According to prosecutors, Jassy was not the aggressor, and Coleman took her life after deceiving her into thinking he would drive her to her friend's apartment. In contrast, the defense team claimed that Jassy acted aggressively towards Coleman after being pushed out of the Uber driver's car. During the trial, defense attorneys attempted to establish that Jassy initiated the fight with Coleman on her own accord and that the crime was a spontaneous altercation rather than a premeditated act of stalking, kidnapping, and murder. Prosecutors argued that the defendant's main claim is that the 119-pound victim attacked the 200-pound defendant. However, Coleman's lawyers downplayed their client's role in the crime. Toxicology results revealed that, in addition to alcohol, Jassy's body contained traces of multiple illegal substances. Despite being convicted of kidnapping resulting in death in June 2022, Coleman's defense team filed a new motion claiming insufficient evidence. However, the motion was unsuccessful. In October 2022, 36-year-old Lewis Coleman was sentenced to life in prison without parole for kidnapping and murdering Jessie Kaur. The court also ordered him to pay her family $60,000 in compensation. Lewis Coleman, a stranger to Jassy Correa, kidnapped, raped, and strangled her to death. The immense pain and suffering he inflicted on Jassy and her loved ones, including her mother, father, brother, and many others, has persisted every day since February 24, 2019. This sentence cannot alleviate their suffering. First Assistant United States Attorney Joshua Levy stated, "By his monstrous actions and callous disregard for Jassy's life, Lewis Coleman surrendered his right to freedom in society." To this day, Lewis Coleman has shown no remorse for luring the 22-year-old into his car, sexually assaulting her, and brutally killing her. Rather than turning himself in, he devised a gruesome plan to hide the assault and murder. Corpus Christi resident Kevin Davis strangled his mother before hitting her in the head with a hammer, splitting her skull. Davis then swirled her brain around before sexually assaulting her corpse. Davis was sentenced to life in prison for the crime of a mom who he described as the best. In 2014, Kevin Chasrell Davis argued with his mother, 50-year-old Kimberly Hill, in the Corpus Christi, TX, apartment he shared with her and his sister, Destiny. On May 26th, Davis called 911, reporting that he'd just murdered his mother. Once at the police station, an 18-year-old Davis vividly detailed the day's events, sometimes with a smirk on his face. What he told detectives was gruesome and shocking. Kevin admitted bashing in Hill's head with a hammer, swirling her brain around, and then sexually assaulting her corpse. On the morning of March 27, 2014, Davis, bored and frustrated with life, told his mother he did not like people and that he wanted to commit suicide. Obviously caught off guard by the statement, Hill allegedly told her son that she could not stop him, that was what he wanted to do. Kevin later told police hearing this from his mother enraged him. It was then he decided to take her life. As Hill sat on the couch in the living room, Davis came up behind her, attempting to strangle her with a cord. Hill began screaming. Kevin panicked, retrieved a hammer, and began bashing in his mother's skull. Davis struck his mother in the head with the hammer at least 20 times, splitting her skull in the process. Davis then retrieved a kitchen knife that he inserted inside his mother's head wound. He swirled her brain around to make sure she was dead, Kevin claimed, and then inserted his hand inside the wound. He would tell detectives during a taped interrogation that his mother's brain felt like putty. Kevin then dragged his mother's lifeless body to her bedroom and raped her corpse. When he finished the sadistic act, he went to a neighbor's house, saying he just killed someone and needed help. The neighbor dialed 911. Police arrested Davis without incident. At the police station, he made a full confession of the crime, giving details that even seasoned detectives found highly disturbing. Watch part of Kevin Davis's confession. During the interrogation, Davis told detectives that he originally planned on killing his sister, too, but changed his mind. He further admitted that he often fantasized about having sex with dead bodies. With a smirk on his face, Kevin also told the detective that he was a virgin before he raped his mother. He stated, "I guess I've lost my virginity to a corpse," as he gently laughed. What did Kimberly Hill do to warrant such a violent death? Nothing more into son murdering and sexually assaulting his mother, of course, and Kevin could not give detectives one good reason for the crime. According to Kevin, she was a great mom that did not deserve what he had done to her. He said that she was the best mother in the world, and went on to say, "I am a terrible, disgusting person." Kevin admitted that he had the best mother in the world, telling detectives that she did nothing to deserve what was done to her. He went on to say that he was a terrible, disgusting person. In reality, Kevin was a serial killer in the making, a psychopath who took sadistic pleasure in hurting other people. Although diagnosed by a psychologist with antisocial personality disorder, the doctor said he knew right from wrong when he brutally murdered and raped his mother. He readily admitted that he would tell again if ever released from prison. He also confessed to then fleeing the crime scene on his bicycle. Before he did that, though, he left several handwritten notes for the police, one of which read, "Chase me. Sorry for the mess. KD." But, after a while, he decided against leaving town and called 911 to report his mother's killing and his crimes. Despite admitting to the murder and making a videotaped confession, Kevin Davis pleaded not guilty to the charges in court. He later changed the plea. Davis smiled at the jury as they sentenced him to life in prison. He serves his time at the Jester 4 facility in Richmond, Texas, and is eligible for parole in March 2044. Story number 2. Story of the Killer Priest. We will be exploring the story of a killer. A priest that seemed to be normal, nothing strange or nothing weird about him, however, he did have a dark side. It turns out that not only was he a pervert, but he was manipulating people as he saw fit, especially women, and now without further ado, let's dive into the story of Guy Desnoyers. We're going back in time in the 50s in France, and we need to take note that the church at that time had a very important place in people's lives, especially in the countryside. The priests were almost as important as the mayors because they were representing a type of moral authority that many people listened to, and this was the case in the small village of Europe where this story took place. A town that had about 400 villagers. Guy Desnoyers was born on the countryside, and his family was very Catholic. They raised him so that he can have a career in religion as a priest, and even if that was not his first choice, that is exactly what he became. It is in 1950 that Guy became a priest at the Church of Europe. In appearance, this young man looked like the ideal priest. He was nice, friendly, kind, and very dynamic. Anything linked to religion, he did it very, very well. He had a lot of great ideas to help the village grow. He created a choir, a group to play in a theater piece. He gave organized multiple excursions for the kids, and he was known to have created a soccer team for the boys of the village. The older people thought that it was very modern for him to bring all these items to the village, and the younger generation thought it was pretty amazing and appreciated the modern aspect that he brought to the town and to the religion. Desnoyers was apparently also a beautiful man, and the ladies found him very charming. Now, as I have mentioned at the beginning, underneath this whole angelic disguise, Guy was actually hiding a dark secret, his personality. He had a thirst for carnal pleasure, and he was using his charm to get closer to the ladies. After a lot of perversity and manipulation, a lot of the women actually gave in, and none of the women spoke as they were afraid that no one would believe them and did not want to be seen as the shame of the village. It is in 1953 that things took a different turn for Guy Desnoyers. An incident happened that changed the plan of the priest. A 16-year-old girl fell for his charm, and guess what happened? She became pregnant. Now, of course, the priest denies everything, and he says that he is not the father. He threatens the girl and says that if she does not stop, he will file a complaint for defamation. Now, having a high influence in the village, Guy says that this is nonsense and it is impossible for him to be the father, and of course, having such an high influence, his followers believed him. He was even summoned in front of his superior, the bishop, to which he lied to you and denied the whole thing, and of course, this whole situation was shut down. In reality, he was actually the father, and he actually took the girl to another village to give birth, where he convinced her to give away the child, and of course that story was never heard of or told to the villagers, or we could say, maybe presume, that if people knew, They decided not to say anything because the priest had such a high influence on the villagers that they did not want to go against him. Once the story died, Guy went back to his normal ways and kept manipulating the people like he did before, but there was another incident in 1956. Regine Fays, 19 years of age, got pregnant and again by Guy de Noyer. Contrary to the other women, Regine did not want to give away her child for adoption. Not only that, but she wanted to raise him in the village of the Uruf where the priest was. Guy was terrified, and he was afraid that eventually the child would grow up and resemble him. He was also afraid that this woman would actually speak eventually. Speaking of which, in 1956 rumors started to make surface. A lot of parishioners were becoming pregnant in mysterious ways, and no one knew who the father was. The priest then starts to think about a plan, and asked a military man from another village to come to town and pretend that he was the father. Unfortunately, that strategy did not work out, and no one believed the soldier was the father. That only made things worse for the mysterious pregnancies. December 3rd, 1956 is a date that changed everything for the priest. Guy brings Regine on a deserted road to try and convince her one more time to give up the child. She refuses again, and she was tired of the priest's requests, so you know what she did? She got out of the car and started to walk back the opposite way back to the village. At night, Guy de Noyer got out of the car and pulled out a 6.35 caliber pistol and fired 3 shots. The 3 shot hit Regine in the back of the neck, then she died on the spot. Once the crime committed, the priest walked to the victim, undressed her, and took out a knife and started to open Regine's stomach. From her stomach, he removed the baby girl that was still alive. The priest committed again an act that cannot be forgiven. He strangled the baby, stabbed it, disfigured it, and he did all the thinking to himself that, if the baby is massacred that way, there would be no way, no DNA, if you want to call it that way, no DNA to trace the baby back to him. The disappearance of Regine was actually reported in the evening, and the weird part is that the priest joined the search party to find Regine. Can you imagine that situation? I mean, the killer is with you in the search party trying to find the person that he just murdered. Is it just me, or that is just like Twisted? The body was found very quickly, and because the priest was now an assassin, he didn't, think about cleaning up the crime scene, so it didn't take long for the cops to find the murder weapon, and they found the weapon casing that linked back to the priest. So the priest is now a suspect, and when asked during the interrogation, the priest denied everything. However, because of all the pressure he was getting, he just cracked and admitted everything. Now that story came out, and everyone was devastated in France because he is now a criminal, and the church asked for Guy to be locked up with a false name so that it would not affect the church, and also the main reason was to make sure that the crime was not associated to the church. The court addressed the case of Guy de Noyer on January 24, 1958. Of course, the villagers and the public opinion wanted the priest to be sentenced to death. The life of Guy was defined as a person that did enjoy luxury, sexual relations, and admired his own authority, and on his side, the priest was asking forgiveness because he had no clue what he did wrong. The jury did provide their verdict, and for most, they said that he was guilty of double murder. Of course, there was Regine and the baby. However, they did not want to sentence him to death. The jury did not want to send someone associated to the church to the scaffold. The priest Guy de Noyer was therefore sentenced to perpetrated work. Now that situation raised a lot of questions regarding the responsibility of the Catholic Church, and this is still a question that is being asked nowadays, especially for the priests who like other kids, if you know what I mean. There was an investigation that was done, and the report came up saying that the church knew the dark side that he was hiding before he was pronounced priest. His superiors noticed that he did not have a lot of faith, and he was not really a believer in Catholic religion. The investigation did show that before being priest in a Uruf, he was sent to Plymouth. While he was there, he did have a sexual relation with his parishioner, and instead of removing his status, they just transferred him to another city. Even there, his weakness for women did not stop, as he did have multiple sexual relations. You would think that the church would revoke his status, but instead he was just transferred to Europe, where the church was isolated and his temptations might be lower. But as we have seen, this was not the case. De Noyer was released in 1972. After being detained for 22 years, he was the oldest prisoner of France. Once again, the church came to his help after he was released from prison. He was welcome in a monastery in Brittany, where he stayed there until he died on April 21, 2010, at 90 years of age. Now we go to story number 3. Family slaughtered at Wellscrape Provincial Park. The killer stalked the family while he let his violent fantasies run wild. 3 generations of a family left to go camping on August 2nd, 1982. They set up camp in the Wellscrape Provincial Park, located roughly 120 kilometers north of Kamloops in central British Columbia. They enjoyed several days of quality family time, picking berries during the day and gathering around the fire at night, having no idea that they were being stalked by a killer. Among the campers was grandparents Edith, 59, and George Bentley, aged 66, their daughter Jackie, 41, and son-in-law Bob Johnson, 44. Also the Johnsons' daughters Janet, 13, and Karen, just 11. The Johnsons drove up with their daughters and pitched a tent for the girls. The grandparents brought a truck and camper where the adults would stay. The last anyone heard from the family was on August 6th, when Edith called another daughter. It would not be until August 23rd that the family would first be reported missing. Bob Johnson was due back at work on August 16th, but didn't show. After a week with no word from him, his company filed a missing persons case with the police. In spite of an extensive search, it didn't result in finding any of the family members. The biggest problems were the killer had a head start. With plenty of time to kill, get rid of the victims' bodies, and cover his tracks. The other, maybe even bigger obstacle was, no one knew exactly where the family was camping at. All anyone knew was that the family was camping in the Wellscrape area, which is massive. They had no idea where to even start, let alone being able to follow a trail to find the family. It would take 3 more weeks and a mushroom picker to find the family. On September 13th, the current discovery of the Johnsons' 1979 Plymouth was found. It had been burned beyond recognition as it set off to the side of a mountainside logging road. The car held the bodies of the 4 adults in the back seat and the 2 young girls in the trunk. The bodies were burnt so thoroughly that when it came time to bury the family, they were all placed together in one child-sized casket. Through a forensic examination of the remains, it was determined they had been shot with a .22 caliber firearm. Locals were able to tell investigators where they had seen the family camped at. An examination of the area would turn up .22 casings, which helped identify the weapon used as a Remington pump-action rifle. What wasn't at the campsite was the truck and camper, the boat and camping gear brought with the family, or any trace of the family at all. With no suspect in custody or even in sight, the media was pushing for answers. A tip came in that the family's truck and camper had been spotted. The witnesses said it was being driven by 2 French Canadians in central Canada. The media sprang into action, throwing this up as their headline and demanding the killers to be caught. In April, with still no leads, the investigators knew they needed to get creative. They reenacted what they believed was the crime scene for TV cameras and aired it across Canada. The next month, the police drove a replica Ford camper truck to Ontario and Quebec in an attempt to draw awareness for what people should be looking out for. What it did instead was flood the investigators with over 13,000 tips and sightings of the replica vehicle. The reward was raised from $7,500 to $10,000 for information leading to the truck. None of the tips led to the discovery of the camper and truck. It would be found by sheer luck. 2 forestry employees were working on a logging road and stumbled across it. The camper had sat there on Trophy Mountain for 14 months, only a few kilometers away from the crime scene. The camper was burned out like the car holding the family's bodies. This left the authorities to believe they were looking for someone local to the Wellscrape area, and not 2 French Canadians as they had been searching for, since it was more likely that a local would know about the logging roads and the area in general. Taking a closer look at the person who lived closest to the crime scene led them back to David William Shearing, 24. They had received a tip about him earlier in the investigation. When they followed up, the tipster had quite a bit to tell them. I hear earlier Shearing had asked him about re-registering a Ford truck and how to repair a hole in its door. This was a tip that the police had never divulged. After finding the truck, it had a bullet hole in the door. After an interrogation by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, Shearing confessed. He went so far as reenacting the murders for the detectives. He turned over evidence that he had stolen from the family and the murder weapon, the .22 caliber Remington rifle. The ballistic test would prove that this was the weapon used to kill the family. The same weapon that had been hanging on his wall the very first time the authorities went to ask him about the family, right after they had been reported missing. Maybe it was because his father was a prison guard or his brother was a sheriff. But Shearing wasn't suspected when first interviewed. In his confession, he gave details of how it all happened. He had first noticed the family when he set up camp, fixating on the two young girls. Then over the next few days, he watched their every move. On the night of August 10th, Shearing watched as the adults sat around the campfire and had seen the girls go into their tent for the night. From a distance, he took out the 4 adults with sniper shots. He said he then killed the 2 girls in their tent as they slept. After he said he loaded all the bodies into the car and moved it to the logging road, then set it on fire with 5 gallons of gasoline. He then cleaned up the campground, removing the family's possessions, including the camper and truck. It would only be later that he'd burned these as he was unable to transfer them into his name. He claimed that he killed the family because he wanted to rob them of their possessions. It wouldn't be until after Shearing was convicted that he gave his full confession of how he had been stalking the family. It was the girls that he fantasized about having sex with that kept him interested. That's why after telling the adults, he kidnapped the girls and took them to his property nearby. There he raped and terrorized them for over a week. On August 16th, the day their father was due back at work, Shearing took Taryn away from her big sister. Once alone, he shot the girl in the back of the head. Janet would be left alive for one more day of torture before she would be killed like her sister. With the girls now dead, he took their bodies to the Johnsons' car where the other family members had been placed. He had actually only hidden the car in some bush. He put the girls in the trunk and got into the driver's seat with the 4 decomposing adult bodies in the back seat, driving it to its final resting place where it would be found by that mushroom picker burned out. David Shearing pled guilty to 6 counts of murder. Shearing was sentenced to life in prison with no eligibility for parole for 25 years. The maximum penalty for second-degree murder. This would be the first time that this sentence was handed out in Canadian history. David Shearing, who changed his last name to his mother's maiden name of Ennis, was first eligible for parole in 2008. The National Parole Board ruled against his release, citing that he was still having violent sexual fantasies and had not completed his sex offender treatment program, so he was not ready to be released. Again in 2012, he was turned down for parole. Applying again in 2014, but before his hearing, he withdrew his request. The National Parole Board has also been given a petition which has over 15,000 signatures, advocating for the violent offender to never be released. In his own words at one of his parole hearings, David tries to plead for freedom, saying this about himself: "I was very selfish." He is supported by his wife, that he married while in prison, Heather. In Westfield, New Jersey, behind the stately doors of a luxurious mansion, a shocking secret lay dormant. John List, a devout father and husband, led what appeared to be the ideal suburban life with his wife Helen, their 3 children, and his elderly mother. Yet, beneath this perfect image, a brewing turmoil was about to spiral into a dark abyss from which there was no return. In November 1971, the unimaginable happened. The entire List family was brutally murdered, and the perpetrator vanished into thin air, leaving behind a mystery that would baffle authorities for nearly 2 decades. What was the real motive behind this horrifying act? And how did an ordinary man mastermind one of the most infamous disappearances in American history? To understand the tragedy of Breeze Knoll, we must journey back to the origins of its central figure, John List. Born in 1925 in Bay City, Michigan, to German-American parents, John's upbringing was steeped in a strict Lutheran faith, a doctrine that would dictate much of his life's path. John grew in the shadow of a domineering father and the weight of religious expectation. His home life was devoid of warmth and affection, replaced instead with rigid discipline and the demand for perfection. Seeking escape and perhaps a sense of purpose, List served as a laboratory technician in the Army during World War II. In 1944, his father died. After List was discharged in 1946, his return to civilian life saw him armed with a degree in accounting, a profession that prized the order and control he had long been conditioned to uphold. In 1950, he re-enlisted to fight in the Korean War. At Fort Eustis in Virginia, he met 24-year-old Helen Morris Taylor, a widow with a daughter, Brenda. Her husband was killed in action in Korea. Helen became the first woman of 26-year-old List. In 1951, John married her. The union, blessed under the eyes of God, was expected to be the foundation of John's ideal family. But beneath the surface, cracks began to form, revealing the dark side of the American dream. Helen's battle with alcoholism and a diagnosis of tertiary syphilis, a secret she kept from John until after their marriage, planted seeds of betrayal and resentment. This disease made her nearly blind. Helen's disability prevented her from walking, and she mostly stayed in bed. The couple had 3 children together, Patricia, John Jr., and Frederick. In 1960, List's stepdaughter Brenda got married and left their house. John was vice president and controller in a bank, and also Sunday school teacher at the local church. The family never missed a service. To the outside world, they were a picture-perfect family. Yet, John's inability to reconcile the imperfections of his family life with the unattainable standards set by his faith and upbringing foreshadowed a silent storm brewing on the horizon. 1965 marked a turning point for the Lists as they moved into Breeze Knoll, a 19-room Victorian mansion with marble fireplaces and a Tiffany skylight in Westfield, New Jersey. It was a grand statement, but its upkeep put a strain on John's finances, further exacerbating the pressure he felt to provide and maintain the facade of success. It was the most expensive house in Westfield at the time, and the family could not fully furnish it. List's neighbors said he was cold and reserved. Sometimes they saw John mowing his lawn in a full suit and tie. His marriage was probably unhappy. The family's Lutheran pastor overheard Helen saying to John, "If you were half the man my first husband was, we wouldn't be having the troubles we're having." John's professional life was marked by frequent changes and failures, a stark contrast to the image of stability he desperately sought to project. In 1971, at the age of 46, John List lost his position at the bank. The job loss was a personal humiliation, a failure not only as a provider but as a man worthy of respect and admiration. His efforts to find another employment were unsuccessful. The thought of informing his family about the loss of income seemed unbearable. He dressed for work every morning and spent his days at the train station, reading newspapers, and covertly withdrew funds from his mother's bank accounts to cover the mortgage. List declined to seek welfare assistance, fearing the humiliating shame it would bring upon him in the community and contravening the values of self-reliance instilled in him by his father. The psychological portrait of John List that emerges is one of a man at war with himself, torn between the dogmatic beliefs of his upbringing and the realities of his faltering life. John was walking a tightrope of his own making. The chasm between the ideal and the real was widening, pushing him to the brink. As winter's chill enveloped the town of Westfield, a shroud of mystery began to unfurl around the stately List mansion. What lay within its walls was a secret so dark it would chill the bones of a community. Days turned to weeks since anyone had seen John List or his family. Neighbors grew concerned, lights in the mansion burned day and night, yet its inhabitants seemed to have vanished into thin air. The once meticulous lawn now lay unkempt, a silent testament to the abnormality of the situation. Finally, light bulbs started burning out one by one. December 7, 1971, marked the day the silence was broken. Police, responding to concerned calls, entered Breeze Knoll. Nothing could have prepared them for the scene that awaited. Organ church music was playing in the cold house as the heating had been turned off. In the mansion's ballroom, the lifeless bodies of the List family were found, each meticulously laid out. John's wife, Helen, their 3 children, Patricia, John Jr., Frederick, and his mother, Alma, had all been shot. It was a methodical execution, a chillingly orchestrated end to a family. On November 9, 1971, List dropped the children off at school. He returned home around 9 a.m. and got 2 old handguns from his garage. While his children were at school, he entered the kitchen where his 47-year-old wife, Helen, was having toast and sipping her morning coffee. He shot her in the back of her head. Then he went upstairs to his 84-year-old mother's room on the 3rd floor. She was making toast. Greeting him with a kiss, she asked him about the loud noise. List said he didn't know and shot her in the face. "Like Judas, I gave her a kiss," he remarked later. Then he dragged his wife's body to the ballroom, mopped the floor in the kitchen, and ate a sandwich waiting for his children. In his memoir, List wrote that he had to mop the floor 3 or 4 times, and because they had no mop wringer, he had to wring it by hand. He confessed that he experienced no qualms or feelings of remorse. His 16-year-old daughter, Patricia, and 13-year-old son, Frederick, arrived home from school. List shot each of them in the back of the head. "I approached all of them from behind so they wouldn't realize at the last moment what I was going to do to them," he said later. "After it was all over, I said some prayers for them all, from the hymn book. That was the least that I could do." He said he had to kill his mother because the other deaths would have been a tremendous shock to her. After that, List had lunch and drove to the post office, and then to his bank to close both his and his mother's bank accounts. Later, he drove to Westfield High School to watch his 15-year-old son, John, play in a soccer game. He drove him home where he shot him 10 times. Evidence of a misfire indicated that his son tried to defend himself. He also didn't die at once, hence List shot multiple times. "I didn't want him to suffer," he said later. He sent notes to the children's schools and part-time jobs saying that the children would be visiting their ill grandmother in North Carolina for a few weeks. Milk, mail, and newspaper deliveries were stopped by him. List arranged the bodies of his wife and children on sleeping bags in the mansion's ballroom. Their faces were covered with rags. His mother's body was left in her converted apartment in the attic. List slept in the house where his family lay dead, then left the next morning. Before leaving, he tuned a radio to a religious station, leaving religious hymns playing in the empty rooms of the house. He explained that the music over the intercom was supposed to deter burglars. When the police discovered the bodies, John List was nowhere to be found. The man who sought control above all had orchestrated his family's demise before vanishing, leaving behind only a haunting letter that attempted to justify the unjustifiable. It was a 5-page letter to his pastor. List's letter speaks volumes. It reveals a man who saw himself as a failure, unable to fulfill the roles society and his faith demanded of him. In his mind, murdering his family was a twisted salvation from financial ruin and the moral decay he perceived. In his letter, he said, "As I was doing it, I knew it was wrong. But as he was broke, he didn't want to subject his children to poverty and the shame of losing their mansion. He also said he saw too much evil in the world, and he had killed his family to save their souls. He was afraid that his family, confronted with a world full of evil and poverty, would turn from God. To his mind, this was the only way to ensure their safe arrival in heaven. He said, "I finally decided that the only way to save them from that was to kill them." He wrote that his family was turning away from God and would ultimately spend eternity in hell for their sins because his wife Helen had stopped going to church. Moreover, his teenage daughter Patty desired to become an actress. I'm sure many will say, how can anyone do such a horrible thing? My only answer is it isn't easy and was only done after much thought. At the end of the letter, he wrote, "Mother is in the hallway in the attic, 3rd floor. She was too heavy to move." List's letter offered a window into a fractured mind. His actions suggested a delusional belief system. His need for control and perfection, coupled with deep religious convictions, warped into a justification for his unfathomable choice. The discovery of the List murders sent shockwaves through Westfield. One of the first officers who saw the bodies, Robert Kenny, said, "After 28 years as a police officer and 14 as an investigator, you see everything. But this was unique." The mystery of John List's disappearance would confound authorities for nearly 2 decades. But as the manhunt stretched on, the legend of John List grew, a ghostly figure who had slipped through the cracks of a society he could no longer face. With the grim discovery inside Breeze Knoll, the quiet town of Westfield found itself at the epicenter of a horrifying mystery. The investigation into the List family murders unfolded like a puzzle missing crucial pieces. Each room of the mansion told a part of the story, but the narrator of this tragic tale was conspicuously absent. As the manhunt for John List began, investigators faced the daunting task of tracking a man who seemed to have evaporated. Meanwhile, the public grappled with the duality of a devout churchgoer and a cold-blooded killer. List had planned his escape meticulously, cleaning the crime scenes, cutting himself out of every family photo with scissors, severing ties, and leaving no trace. He burned the photos along with his passport in his Weber grill. In an era before digital footprints, List vanished into the ether. The FBI found his car parked at Kennedy International Airport in New York, but there was no trace of him. The police investigated hundreds of leads without success. In August 1972, 9 months after the murder, Breeze Knoll stood empty until it was mysteriously destroyed by fire. There were rumors that the house was cursed. Despite being officially deemed arson, no suspects have been identified. The fire also consumed the mansion's ballroom stained glass skylight, believed to be a signed Tiffany original and valued at around $100,000 at that time, which would be approximately $700,000 today. Selling the ceiling would have allowed List to pay off his debts. By 1974, a new house had been constructed on the property. The absence of technology in 1970s was a cloak of invisibility for List. His identity was erased. For List, it was a desperate bid for survival, a twisted form of self-preservation that made him abandon his name, his history, and his crimes. Assuming the name Robert Peter Clark, List started anew in Denver, Colorado. Here, he melded into the fabric of society, unnoticed. For List, integrating into a new life was simpler in a city like Denver, which during the 1970s saw a significant number of people relocating from the East Coast. He grew a mustache, swapped his suits for casual clothes, and took to wearing a cap, yet made no significant effort to alter his appearance further. He first worked as a chef at a Holiday Inn, and between 1979 and 1986, he worked as the controller for a paper box manufacturing company located just outside Denver. Adopting a new identity allowed List to compartmentalize his guilt and live outwardly as a regular citizen. Yet, beneath the surface, the burden of his past life lingered, a specter only he could see. List's new life was a mirror of the old, minus the family he had destroyed. He worked in accounting, remarried, and maintained a facade of devout faith. He became a member of a Lutheran church and organized a carpool for congregants without transport. At a church event, he encountered 35-year-old divorcee Dolores Miller, an Army PX clerk, and they married in 1985. He told her his first wife had died of cancer and moved into her apartment in Aurora, Colorado, situated 10 miles east of Denver. In February 1988, the couple moved to a house in the Brandermill neighborhood of Midlothian, Virginia. There, List continued his career in accounting at a small firm. For nearly 2 decades, John List, now Bob Clark, believed he had outsmarted the world and committed the perfect crime. He let his guard down, losing his mustache. But as the 18th anniversary of the murders approached, a television show was about to shatter his illusion of freedom. On May 21, 1989, a pivotal episode of America's Most Wanted aired, turning the tide in one of the most baffling manhunts in American history. The decision to feature List on the show was a gamble. With few leads and fading memories, the case had grown cold. But America's Most Wanted had a secret weapon, an age-progressed clay sculpture of List, crafted by forensic artist Frank Bender. Psychologists speculated that List might wear spectacles similar to those he wore in his youth, as a reminder of more successful days. Bender's creation was eerily prescient. He envisioned List with glasses and a receding hairline, a testament to the power of forensic artistry. An audience of 22 million saw the sculpture. When the episode aired, the phone lines lit up. On that evening, a man known as Robert Clark was present at a church event in Midlothian, Virginia. Meanwhile, several of his acquaintances were at their homes, contacting the hotline established by America's Most Wanted. They identified their reserved friend and neighbor as the individual who had horrifically murdered his family years earlier. At the same time, people from Golden, Colorado, were reaching out to the same hotline, asserting that John List and Robert Clark, the local French fry cook who had recently moved to Virginia, were indeed the same person. An old friend of Dolores recognized the man on TV and also made a call. One tip came from List's next-door neighbor. According to her, the resemblance was striking. She said her neighbor was also an accountant and attended church. The viewer's tips led authorities to Virginia. The confrontation was the culmination of years of evasion, a moment when List's meticulously constructed world came crashing down. FBI agents knocked on the door of the shared home of Dolores and Robert Clark. Dolores answered, but her husband was at work. She showed them 2 photos, one from their wedding day, which were the spitting image of the bust. One officer stayed with her while the other rushed to List's accounting firm where he was apprehended. The arrest of List, who had been a pillar of respectability to the outside world, was a shock. FBI agent Kevin August said, "He was a strange man, I would say. He was not very animated. That's the best way to put it. He seemed to me as a vessel, with no soul in there." When driving List to the police station, August asked, "What kind of man are you, that you killed your mother, your wife, and your children, and then assumed another identity and married another woman who has no idea who you are?" List said nothing, but a single tear rolled down his eye. List maintained his assumed identity for months after being extradited back to Union County, New Jersey, in 1989. However, on February 16, 1990, when confronted with undeniable proof, including fingerprints matching those in his military records and crime scene evidence, he admitted to his real identity. In custody, List confessed to the murders, citing financial ruin and a twisted belief that killing his family was a merciful act, sparing them the shame of poverty. But there were deeper issues at play: List's need for control, his rigid moralism, and his inability to face failure. His actions, though unfathomable, were a twisted solution to an unsolvable problem in his mind. Expert psychologists also believed that List was going through a midlife crisis. The prosecution pointed out that was no excuse for killing 5 innocent people. A court-appointed psychiatrist determined that List suffered from obsessive-compulsive personality disorder, believing his only options were either to accept welfare, which he deemed unacceptable due to the potential for public ridicule, and the contradiction of his father's principles regarding the care and protection of family members, or to kill his family, ensuring their ascent to heaven. Alan Goldstein, who examined List for the defense, said, "It wasn't as if he didn't have a conscience. If anything, his conscience was too bright. He felt responsible for saving souls." His wife couldn't believe that List was a mass murderer. She said, "I love my husband very deeply. I cannot believe this is the same man." Later, List confessed to his wife, sobbing and saying to her, "I was always such a kind, gentle man, except for that one act." John List's capture closed a long-standing chapter of mystery and horror, but it also opened a window into the mind of a killer, revealing the dark corners where rationality warps into madness. The trial of John List unfolded in a Union County courthouse. Defense lawyers depicted List as someone deeply affected by a religious upbringing enforced by his parents, which, they argued, drove him to madness. However, the jury was unconvinced. Throughout the trial, the emotionless tone of List's letters, his clearly planned escape strategies, and his lack of remorse, maintaining he acted as the savior rather than the murderer of his family, resulted in his conviction. During his trial, List testified that his financial difficulties reached crisis level in 1971, following his job loss due to the shutdown of the Jersey City Bank. To hide this embarrassing fact from his family, he maintained his usual routines. Over time, the family's financial situation became worse, leading List to encourage his children to find part-time work under the guise of teaching them responsibility, though it was actually a strategy to aid the family's finances. Furthermore, he struggled with his wife Helen's alcohol dependency and her undisclosed tertiary syphilis, which she had hidden for 18 years after contracting it from her first husband. Helen had manipulated List into marrying her by falsely claiming pregnancy, then insisted on a Maryland wedding to avoid states that required syphilis testing before marriage. At the time, a premarital syphilis test was mandated in most other states. Her condition deteriorated over the years. She didn't say anything about that to List, but a thorough examination revealed the condition in 1969. Eventually, her disease, together with her excessive drinking, transformed her into an unkempt and paranoid recluse who would often humiliate List in public, comparing him unfavorably to her first husband in bed. John List's actions were a cataclysmic culmination of years of internal and external pressures. Financial despair, a crumbling facade of familial perfection, and a rigid, punitive religious upbringing coalesced into a devastating breakdown of his moral and psychological boundaries. Witness after witness painted a portrait of a man at odds with reality. Yet, it was List's own letters and the chilling confession tape played for the jury that offered the most haunting insights into his psyche. In his confession, List spoke with a chilling calmness, claiming financial ruin and a misguided attempt to save his family's souls as his motives. But beneath this veneer of rationalization lurked deeper, darker struggles. When the verdict came, it was unanimous. Guilty on all counts. On April 12, 1990, List was found guilty on 5 counts of first-degree murder. During his sentencing hearing, he refused to fully accept blame, stating, "I feel that because of my mental state at the time, I was unaccountable for what happened. I ask all affected by this for their forgiveness, understanding, and prayer." However, the judge firmly disagreed, declaring, "John List is without remorse and without honor," he said. After 18 years, 5 months, and 22 days, it is now time for the voices of Helen, Alma, Patricia, Frederick, and John List to rise from the grave. List received the maximum sentence allowed then, 5 consecutive life terms. List appealed his conviction, citing post-traumatic stress disorder from his military experience as impairing his judgment and claiming the letter found at the crime scene, which was essentially a confession, should be considered a confidential message to his pastor and not admissible in court. These appeals were dismissed by a federal appeals court. Years later, List admitted some regret for his actions in a 2002 interview with Connie Chung, saying, "I wish I had never done what I did. I've regretted my action and prayed for forgiveness ever since." Regarding why he didn't take his own life, he believed it would have prevented him from going to heaven, where he hoped to be reunited with his family. "So eventually I got to the point where I felt that I could kill them. Hopefully, they would go to heaven, and then maybe I would have a chance to later confess my sins to God and get forgiveness." He also said, "When we get to heaven, they'll either have forgiven me or won't realize what had happened. I'm sure that if we recognize each other, we'll like each other's company just like we did here when times were better." List passed away at the age of 82 from pneumonia complications on March 21, 2008, in prison at St. Francis Medical Center in Trenton, New Jersey. John List's case became a cornerstone in the study of family annihilators, offering insights into the mind of a killer who operates under the guise of protector, driven by twisted logic and profound psychological distress.